made it to the home of Blerd on the Street, where three black women talk about their geeky interests, nerdy pursuits, and current events. If you like our show, please leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. Special thanks to NPR Girl and Phaedra220 who've already left us reviews. You can always find us on Instagram at Blerd on the Street and Twitter at Blerd Street. Now, on to the show.
Hi, my name is Jenna, and I think coffee, books, and makeup are life. You can follow me on Instagram at PhillyGirlJL or on TikTok at PhillyGirlJLH.
Hi, I'm Jillian. A matcha latte and my Nintendo Switch are never far from my reach. You can find me at Jillian.Corinne on Instagram.
Hi, I'm Lillie, and I run on flat whites and raspberry scones. You can find me on Twitter at AliseOnLife. That's ALISEONLIFE.
Welcome back, Blerds. Today we are going to be analyzing and discussing Loki episode 3, Lamentis.
Episode 3, Sylvie, well, who we know to be Sylvie, the Loki variant, and one of the hunters, I think it's Hunter C20 that she captured in the last episode, episode 2, at the Renaissance Fair. And they're talking over drinks. Hunter C20, she gets a brain freeze, and they start talking about like the science of brain freezes. So the variant asks Hunter C20 where asking how many soldiers are guarding, how many Minutemen are guarding the timekeepers, and where in the TVA building they are. And you kind of see Hunter C20 kind of coming out of this, because we realize a second later that it's an enchantment that the variant's doing, trying to make, I guess, Hunter C20 comfortable and like pretending that they're best friends. So why wouldn't you talk to me about all this stuff at your work? But it's interesting because I think one of the times that Hunter C20 kind of snaps out of it, the bar scene changes a little bit. So like one point they're talking and it's like bright outside. It's like a cute like little bar, and then the next minute they're kind of like in like a dive bar. It's dark. I don't think there's much to say about that scene.
So I actually was wanted to kind of get your take on this scene, because she kind of explains the way enchantments work. I'm not sure if we got that in the last episode or if we find that out later on in this episode.
I believe it's later on in this episode.
Right, because I was wondering, is she actually creating scenes, or is this like this is a memory that the hunter had and she's inserting herself in as the other person who is there instead of, is she taking the place of a person who was already there, or is this like she's just creating something that seems familiar to the hunter?
I mean, that feels like an open question. I think it's like the setting and the place obviously is from Hunter C20's memory, but whether the actual scene that is happening was the scene that happened in real life, and just her as substitute for the person that C20 was actually talking to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we ever know that, right? Like
Right.
she
No,
says
I mean, we find out later that it's a memory. It's like they built it around a memory and like a feeling of, okay, this place is familiar to me, or if it's actually
like a direct memory.
direct memory that the variant just changes the script in.
Also here, we as watchers don't really know this yet, that this is sort of a prelude to us finding out that everyone at the TVA was once a human and had like a human life, because the way it's presented, it sort of just seems like the variant creates an atmosphere and a scene and uses that to try to lure C20 into giving her information.
Mm-hmm.
So on first watch, I actually really did think that was what it was. That the variant created a scene where she would be a friend of C20.
Yeah.
And that would allow her to get information out of C20. But
Mhm.
looking back on it now, I'm like, so this is actually showing part of C20's human life.
Right. And I think it's interesting because in this show with the TVA and all the people in it, we don't see like them going home or even like really going to sleep. The only people who like rest are Loki and I believe Sylvie the variant. I think we get scenes where they actually fall asleep, but we don't see anyone like Mobius, like, because I remember there was one point, I think in the first episode, he says, you know, we'll finish up in the time theater tomorrow, but we never really see time pass in the TVA, or like we see like Mobius going home and like taking off his tie and like putting his feet up or anything. Like we only see them working.
We never see them in their own personal space. We only
Right,
see
so-
them in relation to the TVA.
Yeah, so I thought this scene was weird when I first watched it because it's like it's very dynamic. There's music playing, there's people walking around in not TVA uniforms, having a alcoholic beverage, which we hadn't seen before, and like, you know, letting loose.
Right.
Well, I honestly, when I first saw this, when this scene first started, I thought it was a dream. That, because you had seen that Sylvie was messing with her in the previous episode. So I thought that this was like, oh, she must be back at the TVA and maybe they're trying to figure out what's up with her and this is a dream she's having. But then when Sylvie started specifically asking direct questions about the TVA, then I was like, wait, something else is going on here. Like, I still knew it wasn't like real life, so to speak, but I knew that something else was going on. And this is also kind of where I started to maybe more critically look at what was being presented, because then this is kind of when I got a feeling that's about Sylvie's powers and what she could actually do. And I'm like, maybe she's actually directly doing this to the hunter.
All right, so then after the show title card, we open up kind of where we left off in the last episode, where Sylvie, I'm just going to call her Sylvie instead of the variant, because we find out her name in this episode anyway. So Sylvie, well, at the end of episode 2, Sylvie turns on the TemPad and opens up a doorway, And we see her in episode 3 coming out on the other side of that doorway. And she's actually back at the TVA because this is her plan all along, is to infiltrate the TVA and get access to the timekeepers. But, you know, what she doesn't realize is that her powers won't work and she won't be able to enchant anybody. So we get this really awesome hallway fight scene, which I think is a staple of every superhero movie and TV show.
Sure.
Is the hallway fight scene.
Yeah. So a moment going back to when she realizes she can't enchant.
Mm-hmm.
So the funny thing is that was like me as a watcher's realization too. Like, even though they had set us up with this, right? Like, the stones are just rocks, just paperweights.
Right.
Loki doesn't have power, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
When she went there and touched that person, I really was like, uh-oh. It didn't even occur to me that, like, those same rules are going to have to work for her.
I thought the exact opposite, because when she ended up in the TVA, that, like, my first thought was, but her powers aren't going to work. And I was like, I don't understand how her powers aren't going to work. And
what's the plan here?
Right. It was at that point that, because I guess at some point I didn't realize that Loki never said that powers don't work in the TVA, or never implied. I don't know. I guess maybe I just thought it was implied and that she would know that.
Right, because she knows everything else about the TVA, it seems.
Right. So,
but that also begs the question: when did she know she had powers? Because if she had powers as a child, right, before she was kidnapped, then at some point, wouldn't she have tried to use them in the TVA and then known that they couldn't be used? So how did she not know already that she couldn't use her powers in the TVA?
So, I'll be honest, I thought honestly that she had, when she was younger, she just had regular Loki powers. Actual enchanting was something, I thought that was something that she grew into.
Well, she says later in the episode that, because Loki asks her, how do you, because he apparently can't enchant people.
Right.
Or has never thought to, which I think is interesting because he's the god of mischief. And he literally enchanted people in Avengers 1, but he used the Tesseract to do it. But anyway, I digress. But she says that she had to teach herself how to use that magic, but that seems to be the only magic she really has.
If she taught herself, then that means that she didn't know these powers, that she had these powers until after she was kidnapped and then subsequently escaped from the TVA.
Right.
So that begs the question that, is a Loki without powers?
I'm also confused about that because Loki said, Tom Hiddleston's Loki said that he was taught magic by his mother, and we know in Avengers Endgame that she says to Thor that she was raised by witches.
Right.
So I don't know how, but then also you got to think about Doctor Strange. Like, he a normal, I mean, he was a regular degular. I mean, he's just like a guy.
Average
but he's like
Joe.
Sorcerer Supreme.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we also wonder, what about Wanda? We don't see her really come into her powers until she gets in contact with, I guess I'll say, with the is it the Soul Stone or the Mind? No, the Mind Stone.
Right.
When she's with Hydra, and then she just has powers. She doesn't. And then, we have that scene in WandaVision with Agatha, and she's with the Salem. She was in Salem, Massachusetts, so she's one of those witches. It's where do people even get their powers?
I also think, to be honest, I think Loki feels like it. This is my take on it: is that he feels like it's beneath him to use magic when he doesn't have to, when he can trick someone into doing something without having to use his magic. And that's what I always felt was
right. Like
him was like
he would rather be clever.
Plus, I think it's also something that he shares with his mother. Like, it's not like she taught Thor magic, like she just taught him. And so maybe that, I don't know if I'd say it's beneath him, but maybe it's just something he only whips out for like special occasions.
right.
I think. Like running away around Lamentis trying to get off this planet that the moon, get off this moon that this planet's going to crash into, I think was pretty, like he seems like he uses his magic more in like those kind of desperate fight situations,
Right.
I think.
But even in the, now getting back to Lamentis, even in much of what they do is just like actually physical. Like they're not there really using their magic that much. Like Loki can teleport. Why didn't he just teleport onto the fucking rocket?
He can? When did he do that?
When he disappears, right? Like he disappears and then reappears somewhere else.
He does it right when they land on Lamentis and Sylvie's trying to attack him to get the Tempad, and he just like zips behind her and then attacks her.
Why did he just do that onto the rocket?
Maybe he has to see it though. Maybe he has to see it though.
I don't know.
Like that was a thing in Doctor Strange when they used that that ring to make the circle to go to a place. They explain that you have
to be able to see it in your head.
Maybe that's it.
Maybe, but that's the thing is that like it feels like Loki does like a lot of things physically that he technically could probably use his magic for as a shortcut.
Maybe it's because because he makes a big deal about saying that he's smart. Maybe he likes to just know, like, well, I am smarter than everybody in the room. So maybe he like constantly feels like he has to prove that. Maybe that like goes back to his childhood because Thor was always like the golden child. So maybe it's like, well, he's just gonna be strong and whatever. I'm gonna be smart and work on my mind being strong.
That could also be because Thor is strong, but he uses his magic all the time. Like he uses the thunder or whatever it is all the time.
Right. In fact, Thor, Thor the movie exactly illustrated like the identity problems that he went through when he suddenly didn't have Mjolnir and then couldn't wield it when he found it like in the place where Shield had surrounded and whatever.
He'll take camp around it.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of Thor's like personhood is wrapped up in him being the god of thunder and being able to wield Mjolnir. Where Loki, even talking about the god of mischief, but it's still like a lot of his personhood doesn't seem to have to revolve around his magic.
Right.
That could be that he cultivated that whole persona because he wanted to be different from Thor and he didn't want to just be using his magic for everything like Thor does.
Right. But I also think it's like budgetary concerns. Because like Loki whips out his magic all the time now, like to dry himself and then to hide the Tempad and hide his daggers and like using it in a fight. And I think it's great and I love to see it, but I'm like, why wasn't this in the Thor movies? Because like they had to spend the budget on the thunder.
They did.
So now it's Loki's turn to have his whole thing. And I love to see it because now we're like getting to know Loki because essentially he was a side character. Now he's like, I mean, he's always exuded main character energy, but now he's like officially like this is his title show. So I love to see it. The budget is open for Loki.
So let's break down some of these scenes that Loki and Sylvie have together.
Yeah.
Lamentis.
Mm-hmm.
What What is, how about we just all kind of maybe throw out like a favorite scene that we could talk about?
Okay. I really liked the scene in the mine shaft when they first get on Lamentis, and kind of agree to become, or they have a truce at least to help themselves power up the tempad and or help each other, rather. Well, help themselves is probably correct too. Power the tempad so that they can get off Lamentis before the planet crashes into them.
I'll be honest, from the beginning, when they said, "Oh, look, there's a shuttle that's gonna take us off this moon, and all we have to do is get on it," I was like, "They're not getting on it." I was like, it would not be that easy that they could just be like, "Oh, all we have to do is get to this shuttle, and we're off the moon," and whatever. I just didn't really believe that. So I liked the sort of ongoing scene once they were kicked off the train. First, trying to get from the point where they got kicked off the train, still trying to get to the shuttle. Yeah, I mean, it's not like one single scene. It's sort of more the compilation of all of those scenes, from point A to point B. But I think that would be my favorite. But I honestly, I love the look on their faces at the end when the shuttle ended up blowing up. Because I was just like, I kind of saw that coming, you guys. Like, did you really think you were getting off?
It's also interesting how like Loki, our Loki, MCU Loki, like kind of stands there for a while, like looking up, like mouth agape, like, wait, I actually failed at something. Whereas variant Loki, like as soon as it was destroyed, she was, she like looked like really downcast, but she like turned her back and walked away.
Right.
I feel that because I think she was used to.
Right. Used to disappointment and used to having not being able to do things like the easy way, so to speak. Right. She's lived her whole life like running and jumping into different worlds and all that kind of stuff, and nothing really is ever like, oh yeah, just get on this rocket and survive this apocalypse.
Right. Nothing's ever really like worked out for her, including her plan to get into the TVA. I mean, she obviously was planning to enchant whoever guard first and like have them take her to the timekeepers, and that failed too. So
this the scene that I like, that part afterward when they walk outside and she and Sylvie right away is like, fuck, like Lamentis?
yeah,
This is the place that you choose all of the apocalypses.
I know.
Loaded on this temp pad, and you choose Lamentis.
I know.
Which I thought that was funny, but then later on thinking about it, I was like, wait, she knows every apocalypse that like how else would she have known Lamentis unless she had either been there before or has some way of knowing what's on temp pads so that she would have realized what apocalypse it was.
Well, aren't they essentially like don't they hold information too? So maybe like each thing was loaded up and then like somebody's report was on that about Lamentis or something, maybe.
But it means that she had prior knowledge.
Here's what I thought. I thought the temp pads were part of a central system. Every temp pad had certain information on it, and that the only difference would be how, I guess, your security clearance, so to speak. So like maybe if she had stolen like someone very high up in the
maybe
in the TVA, that she might have had more access to more information, but that generally speaking, all the temp pads had a certain level of information on there, and that to me, apocalypses probably wouldn't have been considered, high level security clearance, so that probably any temp pad she stole or any temp pad she used would have had that kind of information on there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. Let's jump straight on to the train. So I feel like Loki, MCU Loki, throughout this whole thing, and it goes back to how I was describing how he looked when it was finally clear they weren't making it onto that rocket. But like, he seemed really cavalier once they got onto the train. And I'm not sure why he felt like he had to act so much.
I don't know,
like,
but
he was just like too much on the train. Like it felt like he was asking to get thrown off.
But I also don't understand why they would have gotten thrown off, because that guy who reported them to the other guards, I consider to be a bit of a Karen, because technically everyone was enjoying the song and dance and joining in, except that person. Couldn't just let Loki have his joy and mind their own business. Like, it's the end of the world. Like, why? I don't understand. If they were already on the train, obviously, well, at least to the other passengers, it would be like, well, they're, they paid, they're gonna be here. Why was it weird that, I guess he was calling a lot of attention to himself, but I don't see why, except to move the plot along, that this guy would have gotten up and like reported them. I don't think these people belong here. They're singing and dancing.
I feel like that actually is pretty indicative of our society, right? Like,
yes.
Higher class people. Like, it doesn't matter that maybe, if he's on the train, he paid for his ticket. It's just that this behavior clearly marks him as not one of us, and only us are supposed to be on this train.
Yeah. It's just very
I
barbecue.
think that's really what it was.
Barbecue Betty.
I kind of saw them getting kicked off the train coming, or like at some point someone would be like, those people don't really belong. Because, like, I mean, and there's nothing against Loki or Sylvie, but there definitely was sort of a feeling that they were not part of the rest of the people that were on there. And I know part of that probably was played up because they were focusing on Loki and Sylvie, but I did really think someone's gonna figure out that they're not supposed to be there.
But they could have just laid low. They could have laid like really low. Like, and still got through it. Loki often reminds me of, like, and this is because I work with kids, but Loki often reminds me of like that 5 or 6 year old who knows what boundaries are and knows that, oh, we're not supposed to do this, or I'm not supposed to do that, but constantly misbehaves and pushes those boundaries to see what the grown-up's reaction is going to be.
Yeah, because he needs attention, because I guess maybe all the parents were focused on Thor, who is the heir.
Right.
And yeah,
I feel like we get in terms of when Loki was talking about Freya being the one who taught him his magic, I think we do get a different feel for that. Maybe some of Loki's like not feeling connected to Thor and his father was partly came from him, as opposed to what may have really been happening.
I was also going to mention they pretty overtly don't belong based on their clothing too.
Yeah,
because everybody else on the train is dressed like they're going to the Capitol for the Hunger Games opening ceremonies, and he actually takes off the uniform that would allow him to blend in, the uniform of the guards of Lamentis. I don't know. We don't really get into that, but he takes off that uniform he uses to get onto the train and changes back into his variant suit. And Sylvie points that out. It's like, what happened to your uniform? But like, he's too drunk to even care at this point.
Right.
So yeah, and that's also like overtly they don't belong. Aside from the fact that as a viewer we know they don't belong.
Right.
I did honestly. I'm glad you kind of brought that up. The going to the Capitol for the Hunger Games. Because this scene really reminded me of that, and I don't know if that was supposed to be, like, I don't know if that was on purpose. It somewhat reminded me of Snowpiercer as well, like when they show the scenes with the upper class.
Yeah, and I think it was, I don't know if it's like intentional to kind of mimic the Hunger Games, but the people who were trying to get on the train it was obvious they were poor because they were wearing like rags and layers of rags, and they were wearing very dark clothing as if it was dirty. And then the people on the train wearing like pastels and very light colors, and they're very like over the top clothing, whereas opposed to the people who were waiting were probably like using clothes as a function as opposed to fashion.
There are definitely optics that recall other things that people would be like, oh, you know, in there, like well, we all know We're Off to See the Wizard is heavily featured.
They definitely know their audience and how to feed into that stereotype and archetype.
So there's the train, and they, you know, as maybe people could have predicted, Loki acts up and gets them thrown off, and then they there is like a moment of despair, right, when it's like, oh no, that was our only way there. Both of them like played off of each other on this, and then it blows up into this whole plan. And then they see the Ark getting destroyed, and I actually really love that scene, how it just kind of gets pummeled.
Yeah, it also kind of reminded me of the scene that I called out in the last episode where the I don't know what crashes into the Roxxon electronic billboard. Same kind of callback to that. It's like, oh no, this is what happens in apocalypses. Something crashes into something really dramatically. And now you know it's like everything's gone to crap.
I actually kind of like the optics on that, because it's like, oh, the rich people thought that they were going to be able to escape and
and then
their, you know, and they're in the same boat as the poor people. They were denying access to the Ark too.
Yes.
It's also interesting in that scene because they're like fighting to get, Loki and Sylvie are fighting and running to get onto the Ark, and people are fighting them so that they can get there first. But then also I thought it was interesting that like there's soldiers fighting to keep them away. So it's like, what are you, we're like, you're down here with me too. You're not on the Ark either. Both of us are going to die. So I thought that was interesting too. Like there are these gatekeepers to the wealthy getting on this Ark or this ship. Yeah, very subtle kind of reminder look at our society through the lens of Loki. Like it's a very like small thing in Loki, but it's something that, you know, I think we can all kind of, at least us as 3 Black women, can relate to, people gatekeeping.
These gatekeepers are like deciding who gets to go on and not, but are they actually going to get on too? Probably not.
All right. Well, I think that's kind of it of episode 3, Lamentis.
Yeah, it's a good episode.
In true Marvel fashion, please enjoy this after-episode cutscene where somehow we ended up attempting to apply physics to the MCU.
Yeah, I want to know what happened now. Like, if he went back in time and was with her, then how does that change everything else?
Yeah, but that's okay with the TVA and what's his face.
Right, exactly. he basically gets to live 2 lives.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. But but Loki, he can't.
Yeah, no, Loki is the problem. Yeah.
Pick up a tesseract at
Yeah.
all.
Right.
They don't even actually say what happened to the Tesseract, though. They just confiscate it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
and then they reset the timeline, so it probably went back to wherever it's supposed to be.
Right.
So, but now that, okay.
Now that we
Don't
kind of
they
know.
keep that? Don't they keep it?
They keep
Yeah.
the version that he took.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's just sitting in some file drawer somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And make a nice paperweight.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know. My question though is, right, that all these things, like they're just like objects and people and like all of that stuff, it takes like matter and energy to create them. I feel like there
Right.
should be like something else that happens.
Yeah, especially like if you're thinking like matter can't be destroyed. Oh no, it's energy that can't be destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Right. And so like the Tesseract puts off like a shit ton of energy.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, maybe when they reset the timeline, it just goes dead. Like the stones didn't
Oh,
look
maybe.
like they were working. You know, maybe that's why they say they use them as paperweights. Maybe it loses its power.
Maybe.
But in that case, the Tesseract that they have is physically the Tesseract that should have been in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So a new
Right.
Tesseract has to be created
Right.
in 2012. So
Oh,
like
right.
creating a Tesseract and then putting the amount of energy it would take to just create a new Tesseract.
Yeah.
And then the
Right.
energy that the Tesseract itself holds. Like I'm like, where's that come from? What is?
I don't know.
I don't know.
It comes
Right.
from the energy of the prime timeline. I don't know. I don't know.
It's like really just talking.
Maybe they borrow the energy of all the like people that disappear when they reset.
Yeah, I
Maybe.
guess.
Like a
Maybe
recycling.
they just
thing.
redistribute.
Yeah.
It's just redistributed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think they ever said if it was magic or some kind of science, but
Right.
I don't think they ever said anything one way or the other.
Magic is just science we can't explain yet.
Right. So, uh-oh. But then it kind of interesting. It's like, well, if there's infinite timelines, and then you could get into all of that. Like, how did those timelines get created? And is it really just somebody was late to work, so now there's a new timeline, but it's not the right timeline? Like, you were supposed to be at work on time so that this would happen.
Right.
I don't know. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So it's very an interesting commentary on free will and like an omnipresent
Right.
being,
Right.
I think.
Right.
I'm not sure what
Yeah,
to
it is.
make of that. Like, I couldn't really explain it, but I do think, I don't know if we could get into like the philosophy of that, or if that would just be like the biggest rabbit hole. This would be a great study for visual culture and art history, which is why I'm like really glad that was my major, because now I really look at things differently, and I'm like constantly questioning things. And so, and like this, how stories are laid out, because obviously when you create something like this, everything is intentional.
Thanks for listening to Blerd on the Street.